With the movie release schedule being somewhat slow at the minute, I wanted to just go back and fill in some blanks and some certain filmographies that I want to explore more of. And one of those filmmakers that had a few films that I hadn't seen yet was Baz Luhrmann. I've seen a lot of his big hits like Moulin Rouge, Elvis, Romeo and Juliet, all of those films. And he is quite mixed in my eyes as a filmmaker, but a glaring omission that I hadn't seen yet is the Australian classic Strictly Ballroom. I have had a Blu-ray of this for the longest time in the Baz Luhrmann collection, and I thought, with it being so slow, let's check out this release, let's see if I like it, and let's talk about it, guys. So let's get into it. So as I mentioned before, Baz Luhrmann isn't exactly my favorite filmmaker of all time. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I have had a real hard time connecting with a lot of Baz's work. I think his style is all over the place a lot of times, and sometimes it works for me and sometimes it really doesn't. I particularly did enjoy Elvis, but something like Romeo and Juliet wasn't quite my flavor at all. It doesn't help that it was one of those movies that was kind of forced on me at school. Those movies just never go over well, and that was one of them. So I didn't really know what to expect with this movie. This does have some kind of significance to me, it being firstly an Australian classic. It does get mentioned a lot in terms of people talking about their favourite movies here in Australia. Strictly Ballroom is mentioned a lot more than probably in other countries, and I think it is because it is such an Australian film. There's also the extra element of, I have an auntie that was a background actor in this movie, so I wanted to kind of see it for her sake as well. And this movie, to me, has some very interesting elements, and I actually did like this a lot more than I expected to. I think it is very interesting in a directorial debut to see how a filmmaker starts off. What does their vision look like early on? A lot of the times it's very rough and pulled back. You kind of notice that in a lot of these. Bottle Rocket is a significant example of that in Wes Anderson's filmography, and it becomes a very interesting gem in that filmography and a great film. Strictly Ballroom somewhat has a little bit of those feelings that I had when I watched Bottle Rocket. I do enjoy Bottle Rocket a lot more than this, but Strictly Ballroom is that type of film where Baz Luhrmann isn't going full Baz Luhrmann yet. There isn't that style of filmmaking that makes the film look like, Baz just did a massive acid trip and just wanted to picture everything that he could see and all of these things going on at once. It's overwhelming and bombastic, full maximalist filmmaking. This doesn't quite have that as much. I mean, it has its moments here and there. It does have a lot of sparkle and glitter that you would typically expect in a Baz Luhrmann film. But here, I think the slightly toned down approach actually works to the benefit of the film, because now Baz has to rely on a very interesting narrative here and something that can connect with an audience. And I do think the narrative here, while very simple or very cliched, is executed really well to win over the hearts of an audience. You have just this underdog ballroom dancing story. You have someone that has been basically groomed to become a champion and be paired up with another performer that is well liked within the community. And then you have this somewhat underdog, someone that is just looked at as someone that just takes the classes, isn't really noticed or anything like that, but actually has a ton of talent and is a better match for this dancer. And there's that conflict that arises from this film. It is somewhat Romeo and Juliet in a little bit of this film. And watching this, you can understand how he got the job to take on Romeo and Juliet later on, because there are some of those elements at play here. But here, I just really enjoyed the relationship between the two protagonists throughout this film. It's easy to connect with them. It's easy to follow this journey as it goes along. And the screenplay itself is quite clever at times with some poignant lines. There's a moment where a character says, "A life lived in fear is a life half lived." And that kind of motto is the embodiment of this movie, as certain characters have to take creative risks, have to stand up to people that are important to them to get what they want ultimately. It's just a very human story, and I love those elements to it. And then you have all of the fantastical stuff here, which mostly has everything to do with the dancing sequences. Real ballroom dancing and sort of interesting plays on ballroom dancing are happening here. There's innovations happening here, which I think are quite interesting, and the way that it's shot and filmed is filled with some of that Baz Luhrmann flair. The final act in particular has a ton of that, and I really enjoyed the way that the film looked in those moments. You know, the way that lighting is captured and things of that just shows that Baz had a clear creative vision from the very beginning. And, you know, as I said, Baz isn't my favorite filmmaker of all time. As I said, he's one that I struggle with from time to time, but I do appreciate that he is a filmmaker with a vision. I don't have to agree with it, but I like the fact that he's always bringing something new to the table, and in a lot of ways, he is kind of an auteur. Only he directs films the way he does, and you can appreciate that, despite the fact that I don't quite love it, and that's why I have kept coming back to his films, because I like seeing an artist bring something to the table, and he does that from the very beginning in Strictly Ballroom. And I think, as I said, with it toned down a little bit while having some of those Baz flares of style throughout, makes a good-looking film that is mostly well constructed and is quite endearing. Once again, I don't love this movie. It's not my favorite of his. I mean, I do think this film does have some significant pacing issues, and I think it has way too many characters involved for the film that it's trying to tell. You could really have this film boil down to maybe 4 characters and it being really tightly written with a heavy conflict in play, but the film just consistently keeps adding more and more and more. And I guess that's not unlike Baz. That's what he wants to do all the time. But I think it does get a bit much. It becomes a bit overwhelming in a narrative that really doesn't have what it takes to sustain this amount of characters, and I think it sort of falls off a cliff a little bit. And it doesn't pick up again until that third act, where there's big drama that ensues and a great final sequence. Overall, Strictly Ballroom is definitely a classic in Australia, and I completely understand why. It is Australian from start to finish, from the cast to the director, everything here, the slang, the way they're talking. It is 100% true blue Aussie, and I love seeing that on the screen from time to time. You know, a lot of Australian films from this era don't click with me at all, and I borderline hate a lot of them. Just, I don't think they're portrayed in the best ways, and you don't really see a resurgence of Australian cinema until basically now, when you've got the Philippou brothers and Jennifer Kent really innovating and creating seriously great art for the screen. But from this 90s era, it was a bit half and half. You had some good things and some terrible things, and I think this film wanted to be taken somewhat seriously while having that Aussie charm and sense of humor that combines to be an interesting piece of art, one that I don't always enjoy, always love, but I can't deny that it is art and wants to be taken seriously, and was an amazing directorial debut from Baz Luhrmann. And as a score, I'm going to give Strictly Ballroom a 3 out of 5, but I think a lot of you out there would probably like this a little bit more than me. I think if you are a fan of Baz Luhrmann, this is an essential watch. I think you'll really enjoy this movie, because I personally think this is one of his better films. And those are my thoughts towards Strictly Ballroom. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you guys think about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.